We have a lot of questions to go through tonight for this book because it has so many different themes in it and we enjoyed it so much. And I just want to see, is there anyone new that's joining us tonight that this is their first time joining our book club? Jill?
Jill and Carolyn, both.
Carolyn, you've been to the book club before.
Not to the book club.
Oh, really?
You know why? Because I never finished the book.
There's no judgment here.
The parties, I thought, I'm just coming anyway.
Good. You should. Yeah, don't ever be stressed about not having finished the book or even having not read the book. You're always welcome.
Absolutely. And anyone else new? Sorry, my contacts are not working tonight.
Jill's new. It's Jill's first time.
Yes.
And Jill, where are you from? Where are you located?
New York City.
New York City. Okay. Welcome.
Thank you.
Well, for those of you I haven't met, I'm Carolyn from JourneyWoman, and Wendy is up there in the red and is the host of our book club tonight, supported by Sally, who is calling in from Australia. And we thought it would be fun tonight to do a quick round of intros and talk about a time, where you are and your name, but also to perhaps share a time or an experience or a place where you have seen a tree that affected you in a meaningful way. And I was telling the story of being in Puerto Rico a few years ago after Hurricane Maria, and this 375-year-old ceiba tree that seemed to withstand everything and was just this icon of strength and fortitude on the island that everybody would come to see, and the horses on the island of Vieques. I don't know if anyone's been there or not, but as you introduce yourself, and we'll just do this quickly so we can get into the questions, is there a tree that you have seen in your travels that you would suggest other people see? So Brenda, maybe I'll start with you.
Okay, so I'm growing a fig tree, and I just took a fig class, 2 classes last week on growing fig trees. I'm in Toronto, and so these are trees that have been taken out of their environment and brought over. I've got a hardy Chicago, and I put it on Instagram and I call it Figaro, and there's a lot of people that ask how Figaro is doing, and I didn't know whether or not Figaro was going to make it because I had to leave him out and have him go through a frost and lose all of his leaves before I was able to bring him into a dark garage. And then I didn't know if he would live through being in a dark garage for the whole winter, but he seems to be doing really, really well. And so when I saw that, and I also saw that Stephen Biggs, who grows figs here in Toronto and is our specialist, was doing a workshop, I decided I'm in. And it was the best 5 hours, 5.5, 6 hours that I've spent in an awfully long time. So Carolyn found out because I wasn't able to attend the advisory meeting as a result of this last week, and so asked me to come in. And so I've been listening to the book, and I've read a lot of reviews, and I've read some interviews with the author. And so here I am, and what a great book so far.
So Brenda's available to answer questions about fig trees as we go through things, or at the end.
Yeah.
And I think Anne has.
Somebody's drying their hair.
Is that a hair dryer?
Yeah, it's a hair dryer.
Oh my
Terry?
goodness.
My hair not cool. Operator.
Who is that?
I don't know.
Anne
had
Terry,
raised her
she's put
hand.
herself on
There
mute.
is a list
Okay.
on the website. I usually, sorry.
Anne, did you have something you wanted to contribute? She's connecting to audio. She had her hand raised. I'll just say a real brief thing about a tree for me. And it's not a place to go see, but as a child, we had a big weeping willow in our front yard. And the branches wept all the way to the ground, creating a beautiful little place for children to go and have a fort or have a play place. And we would play around the ring of the tree, in our shelter of the leaves, where it was our little fort that we used as a child. So when we tore it down, when we had to cut it down, because the streets got paved. It was a real tragedy in my life, but I've always loved willow trees because they give me a feeling of comfort.
Yes.
Lovely. Karen, any trees in your life?
Well, there is one
Travels?
in Kingston, Ontario at one point, and we had a very tall, spindly birch tree in the middle of our backyard, and we had an ice storm known as a silver thaw. The poor tree was frozen, and it was bent over such that the top was actually touching the ground. Bent over, totally bent over.
Oh.
And every day I would go out as the thaw was melting, and I would say, "Come on, tree, you can do it. Come on, get up. Come on, you can do it." And finally, the ice melted, and the tree stood up straight as if nothing had happened to it.
Oh,
Amazing.
wow.
I know.
That's great.
Inspiring.
Carolyn.
Oh, it's hard to pick just like one special tree. I do have a fig tree that's followed me from place to place for quite a few years, and it's still surviving. That's always a good thing. Although it leans toward the sun, so I keep having to turn it, and I put it outside in the summer so that I will, I hope that its other side will balance out, but it never quite works. Anyway, yeah. So I'll have to start talking to it.
Works.
Peggy?
Unmute. There we go. Okay, so Wendy, I also had a willow tree in our front yard, which I loved to read under growing up. But I wanted to share, I'm reading Jane Goodall's Hope book. And she mentioned the tree that survived 9/11 at the site. And one of the firefighters or somebody who was down there saved the tree, brought it up to the Bronx to nurture it, and now it's back down at 9/11. And I thought that was pretty inspirational.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Lovely. Jill?
As I said, I'm from New York City, and I would say, especially this time of year, the cherry blossom trees in Central Park and magnolias too are blooming. And especially last year during the pandemic, I was unemployed, and I spent a lot of time walking in Central Park, and those trees were just such a sign of, spring and life. So I would say
Beautiful. Welcome. Anne?
Anne?
Hello.
Oh, there you are.
Hi. I'm sorry, I'm a little late.
You might not know what we're doing. We're talking about trees on our travels. Any trees that we've seen that have been meaningful?
Well, my first thought is in my backyard growing up in Tennessee was this huge mimosa tree that was really three trees in one. It had wrapped around, and I loved, the pink blossoms in the summer and just, swinging on its branches and climbing it and such. But I have to say that in France, in Paris, I was struck by, and other places too, I'm always struck by seeing sycamore trees because I grew up in an area that was called like Sycamore Creek and such, and it just made me feel, that the world is kind of small, and, everywhere I go and I see a tree from home, it's like, oh, wow.
Good.
Nice. Nice. That's great. Mary?
I had two things, but one of an oak tree growing up where we used to climb on the tree all the time, climb up, and a cat got stuck. So the big event was the firefighters coming. But then I just thought of Angkor Watts with those trees.
Oh, yeah.
Just, enveloping the anchors, the Watts. And I mean, wow, that definitely beats out my childhood tree.
Lovely. Nina?
Hi. So this is my first time here.
Welcome.
And I haven't read the book, but I've been following the author and I'm just fascinated by her work. So I'm looking forward to reading the book. And I've been enamored with trees since I was a little kid. But I'm now living in Florida and I'm actually doing some volunteer work at the Botanical Gardens where I live. So I'm just fascinated by, you know, I think people don't think of Florida having seasons, but they really do have seasons. So for instance, right now, the jacaranda tree with the beautiful purple flowers, it's just magnificent. So I just feel so blessed to be in nature all the time. I'm always had a special feeling for magnolia trees too. In my youth, we used to visit Savannah, and I can't always remember the magnolia trees, but trees play a very important part in my life.
Oh, it's beautiful. Thank you. Mary?
Hi, I'm Mary Clark from Detroit, Michigan. And one of the trees that inspired me was in Hampton, Virginia, on the campus of Hampton University, and it's called the Emancipation Oak. And I probably saw this in the early 2000s, and it's historical marker that in like the early 1860s, a woman from the local church would read or teach children to read and write. And when Abraham Lincoln read the Emancipation Proclamation, he read it at the site of the church. I mean, at the site of this tree. Wow, yeah. So it's a huge tree, it's massive. And to stand beside it, you know, you really feel its power and its presence, and, you know, just to know how old and sturdy it is. So it was quite impressive to me when I saw it.
Beautiful story, thank you. Vicki?
And Vicki, you're still on mute, so you might need to unmute yourself. There you go.
I'm eating dinner as we go. No, I don't really have one particular tree, but I would say that my favorite trees in general are jacarandas and redbuds, which both
yeah. Yeah, redbuds are one of my favorites too. Yeah.
Lovely. Therese? Therese?
Therese, you're on mute as well.
Okay, we'll come back. Laura? Lana. Sorry, Lana. My contact lenses are fogging up.
Lana? Okay, she may not want to speak right now. What about Sharon? And Sharon, you're on mute.
Hi, this is my first time here.
Welcome.
So I'm just listening tonight to see how things go.
You're
and
very
I don't
welcome.
want big tree story, so.
Yeah. Well, the way we usually do these, this one started off a little differently, but we just go through a guided discussion, and Wendy's going to kick us off and talk a bit about the author and the plot line of the book. And then we have some discussion questions, which are on our website, and I'll also put the link in the chat, but we'll go through as many as we can over the next 45 minutes or so. So Wendy, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. Well, I usually start, for those of you who know, I usually start talking a little bit about the author. And when I was doing my research on this author, I found a lot of quotes that I have a lot of quotes that she had that really, I think, give us some background in why she's telling this story. So I just want to read a few of them, and you'll see, if you have read the book, you'll kind of see how some of these fit in. The first is the whole, and I call it the elephant in the room, having the fig tree being an important part of the story. And how she said, there are unhealed wounds in Nicosia. Now, Nicosia is the capital of Cyprus. It's both the capital of Greek Cyprus and the capital of the Turkish Cyprus. It is a divided capital, the only divided capital in the world right now. And so it's being held by two different territories. And she said there are unhealed wounds in Nicosia. where the turbulent past is very much alive in the present moment. Ethnic conflict, divisions, partition. How do you approach such a subject? And she said she couldn't find an angle until she found the fig tree. Okay? Because even though almost half of the book is written from the point of view of that fig, it's a way that she can offer a calmer, wiser point of view. You know, the fig it's a memory keeper, she says. Tangled beneath our roots, hidden inside our trunks, are the sinews of history, the reins of war nobody came to win, the bones of the missing. Trees, she writes, will be the ones that sit silently in communion with human remains. So I think that the use of the tree gives a way to get out of that emotion and talk about more in terms of the continuum of time. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why she's using the tree. Another thing she's very much in tune with, she says, I've always believed in inherited pain and trauma. She says, I've observed many immigrant families or families in exile, but also found this coming from complex backgrounds, maybe divided lands. There's a complexity in family ancestry, and there are fractures. There's pain and accumulated melancholy that cannot easily be put into words, but it's still there. There are silences. There are absences, and those absences matter as well. I've seen how those absences can shape people. Even when we don't quite know the exact story of our grandparents, the things they do not talk about have a big impact on us. And I think, again, you can think about the story, where Daphne wanted to know more about her past, and her parents didn't tell her anything. They wanted to keep it from her to keep her safe and to not have to feel the pain, but she was longing for those things that were in the past. And Shafak also says, we need some degree of forgetting in order to heal. But that healing cannot start unless we remember first. So memories matter. Memory is a responsibility. So I think those are, to me, those are some things that really tell us a little bit about sort of the author's mindset. And I think it's played out very well in the story. If you know that that's kind of where she's coming from, then the story, how it unfolds, makes a lot of sense in my mind. So with that, we'll go into our favorite, the first part, which is always a favorite passage. And I'll give you two of mine, and then others can share. My first one is a very short one. But she says, in the book, it says, whenever something terrible happens to a country, a chasm opens between those who go away and those who stay. And I really like that because, and I think even our book last month, there was those who go and those who stay. And I'm also looking at in terms of what we're seeing in the world today between those who are leaving Ukraine and those who are staying. There's a chasm that really divides those two groups. And it depends on when you go. Do you go at the beginning? Do you go at the middle? Do you go at the end? And I've even seen that in terms of my Cuban friends. When did they leave Cuba? Was it pre-revolution? Was it post-revolution? Was it during the Mario boat lift? There's a chasm between them. So that was one of my favorites. The other was really the very end of the book, Carolyn, the last 3 pages. So, and it's towards the end when Ada's going to return to school, and she's a bit nervous. And her father talks to her, and he's talking about blue jays. He said, do you ever know the story about blue jays? He said, scientists think the mimic cry is intended as a hint to fellow jays, warning that there's a hawk nearby. But some people believe there could be another explanation, that it could be a survival strategy. When the bird is frightened, it helps its nerves to impersonate a hawk. This way, the blue jay scares off all its enemies and feels braver. And Ada flickered a glance at her father and saying, are you telling me to pretend to be someone else? And he says, no, it's not pretending. When the blue jay soars into the sky, calling out like a red-shouldered hawk, in that moment, it becomes one. Mm-hmm. And I really like that idea of, how to get through your fears is you become it. You overcome. And I really like that idea. So I think I want to be a hawk now. And not a hawk. I want to be a blue jay impersonating a hawk in my fears. So those are a couple of my favorite areas. Anybody have some favorite sections they want to share, or either a passage or section they want to share with us? Sally, yeah.
Yeah, I've got I so many favorites, but I'll keep myself to two, but one of them I'm going to save for a little bit later when we talk about the division on the island and the healing of division, because it was one that really, really struck me. But the one that I just enjoyed was when she was talking about, I think it was the fig tree, he was talking about mosquitoes and talking about how mosquitoes kill far more people than any other species on the planet. And she says in Cyprus, with its swamps, marshes, peatlands, and streams, Cyprus used to be their Eden. Famagusta, Larnaca, Limassol, they were everywhere once upon a time. An ancient clay tablet found here read, "The Babylonian mosquito devil is now in my land. He has slain all the men of my country." Well, it would have been more accurate if it had said, "She has slain." As it is the female of the species that causes the carnage. But I guess it's not the first time women have been written out of history. They've been around forever, though not as long as us trees.
Very good. Any others? Yeah, Peggy. Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah. Okay. So actually, one was a little bit not so grand, but when Ada is in bed and the quote is, "This evening she did not want to be caught yet again in the cobwebs of anxiety that she was all too capable of weaving." I thought that just nailed a feeling really well. Mm-hmm. And then the other one was, actually, I liked the story about the hawk, but I highlighted Ada's reaction to it, the eye roll, that she had, and Ada patted her father's hand. There was something childlike in the way grown-ups had a need for stories. And I was like, yeah, I can hear that.
And I love that quote, Peggy, about the anxiety, because it really captures how you can become so trapped in something that's often of your own making. Yes. And yet be powerless.
I knew exactly what she was talking about. Yeah.
Me too.
Now, before we go a little further into the book, just I'd like to take a quick poll, and you can just put it in your chat if you want. On a scale of 1 to 10, how did you feel about the book? Did you like it? Did you not like it? So just a quick chat, and Sally will tabulate the numbers later and give us, towards the end of the time, we'll get an idea of the overall feeling from the group.
And that's 10 being you loved it, and 1 being you hated it.
Yeah. And while we're doing that, what has been your experience with Cyprus prior to the book? Has anyone been to Cyprus before? I know I have, but has anybody else been to Cyprus? Or what have you thought about Cyprus in the past? Well, I will tell you that my experience was, I remember as a child, I wasn't a child, I was probably a teenager or a young adult when the Cyprus War happened. And I can remember my mother explaining to me that how ridiculous it was to have where there's a street down the middle of a city, and because right after the war, you could not travel between the northern and southern Cyprus. It was illegal to cross the border. So if you wanted to go from northern Cyprus to southern Cyprus, you'd have to fly to Turkey, take an airplane from Turkey to Europe, and then fly from Europe into Greek Cyprus. It was that kind of a real division. Now, when I went there, which was about, I guess 7 years ago, something like that, and I was staying in the Turkish side. I did fly into the Greek side, and you had to cross through the border, which is still an armed border guard, where you go through a series of stops. First in my case, first the Greek Cypriot side, which had to stamp my passport that I was leaving their area, had to be searched. And then I would get over to the Turkish side where I'd have to be searched again and get a stamp to go in. And think about it this way, Nicosia is a city, and that border goes right down the middle of the city. So people living across the street from each other don't have that kind of ability to just pass back and forth. So it's a very unique situation. But in northern Cyprus, during the war in Cyprus, what happened was any of the Greeks living in the north and the Turkish people living in the south, when the war ended, they basically abandoned their properties and went to the other side. So that everybody in the north was Turkish and everybody in the south was Greece. And so you had abandoned properties all over the place. And so they actually were doing house swaps, a family in this city and a family in that city would swap their houses. But what was fascinating to me was there's large sections I don't even remember the name of the city I was in Cyprus, on the northern side. It's where all the Hollywood stars used to hang out. I mean, I can remember Elizabeth Taylor used to go there, all these kind of big Hollywood types. Pardon? Yeah.
Would that be Varosha?
I'm not sure I don't remember offhand, but it's this area of the city that were these huge mansions. And it is now all just boarded up. It's all controlled by some military body. I'm not sure which one. And literally these mansions, when I think about Hollywood, a Hollywood Boulevard type mansion area that's all been abandoned. It is now just starting to collapse upon itself, with trees growing into falling into the swimming pools and growth coming up there and stuff coming into the houses. You're not allowed to go in, but you can look through fences because it's all fenced off. You can look through fences to see these beautiful homes that are now just falling into decay and being overgrown since the war. And it's just, they were all just left as is. So that was my experience. But it has beautiful beaches, beautiful, beautiful beaches, and a lot of religious history. And even in the northern section where I was, the Muslim section, there were many, many Christian sites that were all well respected and people, because I don't remember which one the apostles went through there, but that was all very much accepted that tourists would come to go through those sites. So it was fascinating to see that kind of differences in cultures and how it's really very different. And there is no love lost between the two groups. So that's where when she talks about the stress and the differences between them two. So one of the questions I have is that the winds and birds cross freely across what they call the green line. That's the border between Greek Cypriot and Turkish Cyprus. And so birds fly freely from one side to the other. The winds fly freely across, and so do some of the human traditions. Do you notice any commonalities between the two communities? Between the communities of Daphne and the communities of, is it Kostas? I can't remember his name. Yeah, Kostas. The two communities, very much different, but very much similar. So have you ever been surprised by shared traditions when you're traveling? In a community that may be very different than your own, but you still see some traditions that are very similar. So yeah, Jill. I'll be on mute.
I'm sorry. I was thinking about being in Israel and seeing religious Jews and religious Muslims and religious Christians, right? And the traditions are not that different. The women cover their hair and they wear long dresses. And, if you go to a Jewish restaurant, the food and have hummus, or a Palestinian restaurant, it's still hummus, right? Like you can say, I call my God this and I worship this way or whatever. But if you're from that same part of the world, and I imagine it's very similar in Cyprus too, like you can't just have a line and say the people on this side of the line are one way and the people on this side are a different way, right? Like they grow up in the same environment to some extent, the same island. And yeah, I see that people are way more alike than they are different, even groups that are bitter enemies.
Yep, good point. Anyone else? I think there's a great example in Israel, because quote unquote total enemies are really, they're living the same life, right? And so one of the things that's pointed out in this book, I think very well, is that we sometimes are broken apart by our identities and by a singular identity that we call ourselves. So for example, if you call yourself a Greek Cypriot and that's what I am, then you can't be like the Turkish side, right? But in fact you are, but you're only using one identity to define yourself. And if you're looking at the region has the same climate, has the same foods are grown, the same kind of long past traditions that have that kind of togetherness. I even think of something as simple as between Canada and the US with our Thanksgivings, right? You know, they're on different dates because of when harvest happens, right? But the concept, and most countries and most peoples have some kind of a day of Thanksgiving. It may not be celebrated with pilgrims in Turkey, but it's, you know, they still celebrate some kind of a Thanksgiving. Some kind of a memorial type day. Different days, different countries, but we still have that time when we remember those who have fallen in wars. So, I mean, if you think about those kinds of things that are really much more global than they are individual. You know, despite so many such shared culture and history, they have ended up in two territories. Have you ever traveled to a place that's forced people to be in separate areas? And how did that feel? And how do you think Defan and Kostas dealt with this division? Thoughts on being put into different places because of who you are or because of people are?
Well, again, as the other person has mentioned, going to Israel and the West Bank and Jordan or whatever, being in the city of Hebron, which was so divided from, anyway, I found that absolutely so sad. I mean, it was heartbreaking to see that situation in Israel and Palestine, the West Bank. It was heartbreaking. I just, beyond, yeah, so sad.
Mary, you had something?
Yeah, this is close to home, but several years ago, and I just learned this several years ago, in my hometown, they have, it's almost embarrassing to even tell this story because it's so provincial. They have a cemetery. On one side, it's called the blessed side, which is the Catholic side. And on the other side, it's the not blessed side, which is the Protestant side. So when my parents, when they were married, my mother converted to Catholicism, but her whole family, of course, her mother, her father, her relatives were all buried on the unblessed side, which was the Protestant side. So then my father, who was Catholic, was on the blessed side. So when my mother had to choose, is she going to be on the side of the cemetery with her family and her mother and her, or with her husband? And it was just, I mean, it was so bizarre to me when I found this out just not that long ago. I thought, wow. I mean, to me, does it strike you as bizarre? I just, and they're all, and they're Christians. It's not like, Muslim or Jewish or it's not real dramatic. It's within Christianity, within the same small hometown. So anyway, that was
Which country? Is this Ireland?
No, this is in upstate New York.
Yeah.
Oh.
Upstate New York near Rochester. So it's here.
There's a moment actually in the book where something is mentioned, and that's what I was thinking about when you were talking about commonalities, a question earlier, where she mentions that all over the island you would find graves of Greek and Turkish widows, and the alphabets used on the gravestones were different, but they all had the similar message, which was, if you find my husband's body, please bury him with me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is that commonality, but it touches so strongly on what you're saying, Mary, where for people for whom it's important to be buried with your family, what do you do if you have that kind of division?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry you had to go through that. That sounds quite traumatic.
Yeah. The one I think about, it didn't happen to me, it was happened to my sister, and my nephew is adopted from Mexico. And during the adoption process, they had to go back and forth to Mexico several times. And the final time when they were allowed to bring him into the country, and they'd gone through the adoption in Mexico, now they had to go through the adoption in the US. She had to physically walk through the border. There was something, she couldn't fly out with him. They had to go cross the border, okay? And he had to come in with his little tiny, infant Mexican passport. And they were waiting in line, this long, long line to get in at the border crossing. And where my brother-in-law was in the car, he waited up ahead while she went in to get his paper stamped. And it was like, I don't know, she said there were like 30, 40 people in line, and they were being all treated very, very rudely by the US Border Patrol. And all of a sudden somebody came up to her and said, "Wait a minute, are you American?" And she said, "Yes." He said, "Oh, then you come up to the front of the line." And she was like, "No, these people are in front of me, and I'm not going to go in front. It's not right that you take me before them. They've been standing here longer than I have." But that was a division that, still was happening today in terms of splitting up people into two categories and treating them differently.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I remember being in Cuba, and my brother had been running a kayak company down there. And so I visited, he had friends that were Cuban, and we went into a restaurant with a friend of his, and we had a wonderful meal. And at a certain point, my brother said, if this woman that was with us, Danya, was caught, she'd be in jail. I didn't know that. And he explained to me too that, I'd been shopping at a couple of the smaller stores, and that I was taking things from their grocery store. I didn't know that. Yeah. And they didn't say anything to me. So without him having lived there and having her explain things to him, we were able to just go and do anything we wanted without knowing. So yeah.
Yeah, Cuba is a very interesting one. It does treat people very differently, locals versus tourists.
Yeah.
So, for example, in Cuba, it's illegal for local people to eat beef.
Yes, that's where we were having steak, and I think that was it.
And local people cannot eat beef. It's only available for tourists.
No.
And so there are certain things like that you feel it's a very conflicting feeling when you realize how much you are being treated differently than the local people.
Yeah.
Wendy, I think in our Cuba book club, we talked about this, and I think it was even that you couldn't go in a hotel.
Yeah, that's changing a little bit. It used to be,
30 years ago.
Yeah, 20 years ago, it was still illegal to go into a hotel, for local people to go into hotels.
I don't know that it's illegal, but I have a friend who went on a salsa dance trip to Cuba, and they had Cubans who were their dance teachers, and they were going to a party or an event in the hotel, and the Cubans had to go through the service entrance. They couldn't go in the front door. And this was maybe 5 years ago. It wasn't that long ago.
Right, but like 20 years ago, locals were not allowed into a hotel unless they were employed there. And so you'd have these beautiful hotels that had, comfort features, or what we think of comfort features at home. I would not say that they were necessarily that elaborate, but local people were not allowed to go to those restaurants, to go to that hotel. It was only for out of towners, so out of country. So how do you think, with that, having been forced to live and travel as two different groups, how did Defane and Costas deal with that division? Yeah, Sally.
This is where I'd love to read my other quote, because it's a series of just 3 little snapshots where I think that they dealt with it very differently. Costas not having been there, he was looking at the whole situation from the outside, even though he was born there. And there's a time when he asks Daphne, she tells him about, the terrible thing that had happened with Yusuf and Yorjos. And his immediate reaction was to ask the men who did this, were they Greek or Turkish? And she turns to him and she says to him, they were islanders, Costas, just like us. And then when he arrives in the northern part of the island, he catches a taxi, and the taxi driver is a Turkish Cypriot. And he's feeling quite anxious about the fact that he's a Greek Cypriot by birth. And this is the beautiful quote, was when he kind of reveals that he's Greek, and then he's so afraid of the taxi driver's reaction that he starts to make small talk about the tourist season. And the quote says, a smile appeared on the driver's face, slow and cautious, like a closed fist opening. Yes, but you are no tourist, brother. You are from here. And that moment of connection between Costas, who had this sharp division in his mind, and the person who'd actually lived through the trauma, was just so powerful for me.
Karen, did you have something, or no? Well, I think also the other way they dealt with it when they were quite young was to sort of escape, right? They escaped, the 2 of them, into the tavern, which the tavern itself has a lot of interesting things behind it. Because if you think about it, in the tavern, where the tree, for those of you who haven't read the book, it's where the tree originated. In the tavern, Yorgos and Yusuf made it possible for Costas and Defane to meet in secret without divulging their relationship. Why do you think they were willing to help them?
They were outsiders in their own way.
In more than one way, too, right? Because one was one was Turkish, one was Greek. So that was one. And plus,
a gay couple at that time.
They were a gay couple that would not have been accepted at all. So I think, in one way, I think it's like they were allowing them to have a relationship just as they had been allowed to, at least trying to get it off the ground, to let it happen, because they knew that a relationship could happen between the 2. And they also knew how important it was to keep it quiet.
And not to be judgmental.
Yep, and not to be judgmental. Any other thoughts on Yorgos and Yusuf?
I like them.
Yeah, they were. I think I would have liked to go and sit in that tavern and have a little wine there.
And conversation, right?
Yes. When he fled, Costas wrote to Daphne, "I've been thinking that you are my country." You are my country. What do you, that separation experienced by many migrants is intensified. Being a migrant itself is an intense process, but it's intensified by the traumatic events on Cyprus. Because of that, those who leave and those who stay. How do you think they tried to struggle to understand each other when they began to reunite? When they were united, had the chance to unite again. How did they try to understand each other And I think, Sal, you brought up a couple points about, when she said, no, her experience, I think I love that quote when you said that, no, they were islanders like us. She's trying to show that they are not different, they're the same. But what were some other things that they did to try to understand each other and cross that division?
The difference in their personalities affected how they did it, because he wanted to talk about it and he wanted to explore it. She didn't want to talk about it. She wanted to bottle it all up, even though she was doing real delving, looking for the remains of people. She, in her personal relationship with him and with her daughter, she didn't want to talk about the actual trauma she'd gone through.
And do you think that's because she went through the trauma? He didn't. So I think maybe he wanted to understand how that impacted her. How did that work with her? What was different about it than now? Because he wasn't there to experience it. But she went through the trauma, and people don't like to relive their traumas, right? So whether it was, I think that was part of the conflict they had, was how do you get through that part of it?
That could also be personality.
Yep.
Some people are much more, they want to delve, they want to explore, they want to process it. And, others do keep it inside, and she kind of processed it by her work. I mean, that's really powerful. And I never thought of it, that connection to her personal experience and the work that she chose to do. But yeah, she was working through all that, I think.
And then we go back to the good old fig tree, who kind of talks in terms, without that emotion, says the first generation immigrants are a species all their own. And how do you think characters tried to connect with the country of their birth while they're still making life in a new land? And if you've ever moved away from where you grew up, how have you found yourself seeking connections with home?
I found when I went away for any length of time, it allowed me to be more in touch with myself, where I wasn't able to necessarily be as in touch with myself because I was surrounded by people that I needed to be around and socialize with and perform for and whatnot. So for me, being able to be on my own, I guess it's a difference between being more inward and being a more outward type of a person. It would depend. And I remember one of the interview questions that was asked of the author about her religion or her belief system, and she said she wouldn't call herself a Sufi, but she did study it, and she had a great respect for it, and it was, in her description, more described as something that was very spiritual. And the religion that she was brought up with was very earthly and very much programmed on fear and don't do that, punishment, and the Sufism was more love and ethereal. And so I think I'm just answering for myself. Mm-hmm. When I went away, I was able to be with myself in a more ethereal way and not so tied down and more open to new ideas. And that's one of the things that she talked about, why she used the fig tree as the narrator, because it opened up a way of unlearning for her. So she was able to take some of the learning that she had that was problematic and unlearn it and see things from a different angle. So anyway, that's just a thought that I had when you said that.
And I think that's true, particularly for those of us who do a lot of solo traveling, is that when you are away from home for a long period of time, your sense of self is completely created by yourself, not by those around you mirroring back who you think you are. There's, and so it really is it's a different way of viewing the world when you're out there for, I'm not talking about for a day or two, but when you're out there for a trip for a period of time, where it's you and yourself and your actions, as opposed to you and yourself surrounded by your day-to-day norm. I know. So I think that's a really interesting take on it. Yes.
I didn't know about her connection with Sufism. I've read another book of hers which I enjoyed called The 40 Rules of Love, which is actually about Rumi. It's a story within a story, and there's a romance, and I'm not a big fan of reading romance, but it was still an interesting book about her imagining of the life of Rumi.
Okay, well, we're almost out of time, so before we go out, I want to make sure we have, first of all, other questions or thoughts we want people to have on the book. So Sally, do you have our, oh yes, Mary.
It's coincidental. I don't know if any of you have heard of this book called, are you able to see the title, The Hidden Life of Trees? But several years ago, I read this. And so when I read this current book, I was just so surprised because it seems so, that might be a running theme now that around for a lot of different people that, this social network that nature has. And I guess the Native Americans have always known that, but now it's becoming more mainstream. But I saw so many parallels between this book. If you haven't read it, it's really, as it says in there, in the book, that once you read this book, you'll never walk through the woods or walk down the street and look at trees the same way, which is very similar to how this book was. I felt like with the fig trees.
Can you put the name and the author?
It's called, sure. It's called The Hidden Life of Trees, and it's Peter Wohleben, and was in 2015 is the copyright.
All right, good. Because I want to take a little bit of time to talk about fig trees. Brenda, tell us about figs. Oh, you're on mute.
One of the things that I kept coming back to was I guess it was the quote of being a first generation immigrant, and how he had taken a branch of the tree and brought it to London where they were living, and how it becomes rooted somewhere else, and then burying it. And so then the burial and the unburial, and the time for being dormant and the time for being fruitful. All of that metaphoric information as it applies to the story that is happening in each one of their lives, from what I've read in the reviews, because I didn't finish it yet. I'm at the part where she screams in the classroom. And I'm also interested in the fact that it's the teacher that's imposing the question of, I want you to find out, and I want you to come back with evidence. And the evidence that she gave wasn't enough, that her father was into plants. It was like, well, can't you think of something else? And it's the most important thing. And then also, when you have a fig, if you want it to branch out and grow, you pinch the growing tip. And I was just kind of thinking of that as a metaphor for the young girl. What do? You pinch it, you stop it from growing in a certain direction, and you to allow it to go in different directions. And again, the burial, when a certain time comes, just the seasonal aspect of what they're all going through in their lifetime. Then there's different kinds of figs that I found out about, and some of them I'm sure you've heard about, where there's one particular one that has a wasp that's inside of it, and it doesn't fruit. So therefore, you don't eat it, but there's something stinging inside of it that helps to pollinate other figs. And then there's another type of fig where you have it pollinating the fig, and there could be the bit of the wasp that is inside of it. So, because it goes up into the center and dies. And then there's another type of fig where there's two crops that grow. One is from the older branches from the year before. So you start to think about the stories of the mother and the father, and then the fruit that they bring to the table. And then there's another crop that comes with certain kinds of figs. First one being called breba, and the second one is the main crop that comes from the secondary branches that occur and grow during the spring. And then there's a whole other set of common figs that grow without any kind of fertilization, that they just self-pollinate, and there's no wasp involved at all. So there's no sting. And I just thought all the metaphors, where does that sit with the whole story? And I'm really looking forward to going further and deeper into this as I'm listening to it. And that's something I really am enjoying, because it's being read by the author with her slight accent and her intonation. And so if anybody hasn't listened to it, it might be something that, if you really enjoyed the book, and there's a lot of nines here, that it might be another way of hearing the information as well. Anyway.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks, Brenda.
Thank you.
Our overall score was an 8.5. Is that what I saw, Sally?
No, that was my vote. The overall score was just under a 9. The average Excel tells me is 8.857, and I'll stop reading the numbers there.
Well, that's pretty good for us.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. We're sorry, Wendy, was there anything else?
Yeah, do you want to tell us a little bit about next month's selection?
Yeah, sure. So next month we are doing Gods of Jade and Shadow, which is a book about Mexico. It's a little bit of a lighter read, and very entertaining. And I think if you haven't started it yet, it will get you interested in Mexican mythology, if nothing else. It takes place in Merida, which is a place where I lived for 3 months last year. Well, part of it takes place in Merida. So I personally found it interesting to hear about the buildings and the streets, thinking about what it would have been like, well, hypothetically, I guess, in the 1920s. So that's our next book. And then we've also put our other books up on the website for the next 3 months after that. And I believe our next meeting is on May 18th, if I'm not mistaken. So we hope you'll all join us again, and bring your friends or tell people to join us. And I just want to mention we have 2 other things happening this week. One is it's Earth Day on Friday, which of course ties in really nicely with this book. So Nora Livingston, who is on our advisory council and is our animal ethics expert, is hosting the session that was on Thursday that's now on Friday because of her flight delays, on Friday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern, where we're going to be talking about how we can be good travelers when it comes to being eco-friendly and animals and wildlife. So if you can join us, that's at 10 a.m. on Friday morning. And I'm also working on a piece on menopause and travel, and we're having a little get-together. I think it's at noon on Friday, just informally to share stories. So if any of you want to join that, send me a note and I will send you the link. It's also on our Facebook group. That's Friday afternoon as well. So it's a doubleheader Friday for me. Yeah, and then we're also setting up meetups all over the place. So we had a meetup in Toronto. We had 2 actually. We have one in Edmonton. So we're in the process of organizing get-togethers so we can all meet in person. And those are published on our website as well as our meetup group. So if anyone's interested in hosting one or would like to come to one, everything should be there so we can start meeting in person, which is so amazing.
And if we want to be
excited, 2 years,
I would love to do one. I would love to do one here in Montgomery, Alabama, particularly highlighting the civil rights that our city has. It's really, from beginning, it's the birthplace of some of the civil rights movements. It'd be a great tourist area to come. So I'll talk to you about how we can set something up.
That would be great. Yeah, I think Mary's going to do one in Detroit, and we've got some in California, Mexico, I'm going to be in Oaxaca in about 3 weeks, so I'm going to do one down there. And we've got one in San Miguel, and I'm trying to think where else, New York. So so we're trying to connect us in real life.
I'm tempted
Really
to
lovely.
fly to the different places just
Yeah.
to meet people. I wanted to go to Toronto. I was going to say, where's a good place to stay?
Well, you should host one in Florida. There's a lot of Floridians.
Well, right now I'm in Virginia, so.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So anyways, thank you all for coming tonight. And we hope to see you again next month. And thank you, as always, Wendy, for being a wonderful host, and Sally for stepping in to help us with this club and continue to grow it. So we appreciate that you spend time with us once a month and talk about wonderful books like this.
See you next month.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks so
Thanks,
much.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.